Yesterday, I came out to the garage and I hit the garage door opener button and the garage door did not go up. The garage door opener refused to lift the garage door, and the problem is this particular spring above my garage door has broken. Now this is something you can do yourself, but keep in mind the power inside these springs when they're wound is extremely dangerous, so you have to be very careful. My garage door is only 8 feet wide, so I only have one torsion spring to work with. Some garage doors actually have two. They have one on the left side and they have one on the right side. The first thing you're going to need is a replacement spring, and I will fully admit if you're not used to figuring out what size spring you need, this can be a little bit daunting. However, there are some reference materials online, and there is also typically reference materials in the store that you're buying the springs to help you size that spring appropriately. Now, shopping at my local Menards, it actually made the process pretty easy. Not only did they have the literature to help me buy what I needed, all of the boxes were clearly labeled, and even one end of the box was color-coded. The color for my particular garage door was yellow, and I needed a left-hand wound spring. Now, because our spring is already unwound, because it's broken, we don't have to unwind it to work on it. It's very important that you treat these springs with some respect, because again, they can be very dangerous if not handled properly. On one end of the spring is what they call the winding cone, and it has 4 spots for rods. You can buy these rods when you buy the springs if you don't have a set. Most big box stores carry them. It's pretty important that you have a set. It's going to take 2. And right now we need to remove this cone because, well, the new spring comes with a new cone. This winding cone has 2 different set screws, and you're going to want to loosen those up so you can remove this spring and get it out of our way so we can put the new spring on. Now the other end of that spring has a bracket that has 2 bolts that holds it on. You're going to want to remove those 2 bolts. On mine, they're 9/16. When you remove that end piece, you're going to find a bearing inside. The new spring may or may not come with that. Now mine did not come with a new bearing, so we're going to keep the old one in place. On the end of this drive shaft, you're going to find 2 pulleys. Those are cable pulleys, and that's what picks up on the bottom of the garage door. You need to loosen those up because we also got to slide these off the end of the shaft to replace the spring. Once you loosen those set screws, that will allow you to rotate the cable pulley in a fashion that you can remove the cable that is attached. They just slide off a slot on the end, and then I like to just store the cable up near the top of the garage door so I can reattach it when I need to. You will also want to do the same thing to the other pulley on the other side of your garage door opener. Get it loose so it can slide back and forth on the shaft. Now I have a jack shaft garage door opener, so I will need to disconnect my garage door opener from the shaft as well. At this point, the drive shaft should slide back and forth freely inside these bearings on this bracket. Now some people like to just slide the shaft all the way over out of the way, slip off the old stuff, put on the new stuff and slide it back, but I don't have enough clearance on either side of my garage door, so I'm going to remove this bracket, which will make it easier for me to get this stuff off the end of this drive shaft. As far as replacing the spring, it's just as simple as pulling off the bracket, pulling off the pulley, sliding the spring itself off the shaft and putting the new spring on. If you have any difficulty sliding the pieces off because of these little burrs that are caused by those set screws, just take a file and file them down. Slide the new spring back on, put the pulley back on, and then put your end bracket back on. After you get the end brackets in and the center bracket taken care of, you're going to need to adjust the spring and you're going to need to adjust those end cable pulleys. To lock that shaft in place, I like to take a large pair of vice grips, and then I usually just clamp the shaft and then back it up against the wall like this. That way we can tighten those pulleys and this shaft isn't going to turn on us. To reinstall and tighten those pulleys, just take the cable, put it into the back of the slot on the pulley, and turn the pulley until the cable is nice and tight. Set the pulley where it belongs on the shaft and then tighten those set screws using your wrench. Now, anytime you're using a set screw on a garage door shaft, the rule of thumb is tighten the set screw till you feel the shaft and then turn it a half of a turn. Do the same thing with the other set screw. Turn it, once it touches the shaft, a half of a turn. Once you turn that a half of a turn, go back and just snug each of them up just a little bit, and you're done. If you tighten them any more than that, you will damage the shaft, and quite frankly, it doesn't need to be any more tighter than that. Now that you have all of your brackets bolted in and you have your pulleys nice and tight, you're ready to wind the spring. General rule of thumb is on a 7-foot door, you want to turn it 7 full rotations. 7.5 is what they say. However, if you're like me, the spring came with a manual, and the manual tells us to wind it exactly 7 3/4 turns. Winding the spring isn't too terrible as long as you have the right tools, and what you need is those winding rods. You can buy them when you buy the springs in the big box stores. You need 2 of them. and you poke one into the end of the spring like this, and you give the spring a rotate, and you put another rod into the hole underneath it, pull the top rod out, rotate it some more, and you keep doing this until you have enough turns in the spring. After that spring is nice and tight, you're going to take your wrench and tighten down the set screws. Now, some people like to bump this end piece while the spring is under tension to try to get it to set properly. When I say set properly, as you tighten the spring expands. That expansion shoves that cone this way down the shaft. It actually makes the spring a little longer, and they feel by bumping the end piece, it helps set it. I think bumping the end piece is pretty dangerous. You're holding that with some rods. It's under a lot of tension. If something were to go wrong, well, an accident could happen, and it's just not necessary. Also, as you're winding the spring, you want to stay on this side of the spring a good distance from it. That way, if something were to fail, it won't come down at you and hit you in the head or the face or on your person. Standing off to the side gives you a little bit more protection. And again, when tightening these set screws, you want to turn them a half a turn. Do each of them a half a turn, and that is generally enough. However, the springs are so tight, I like to go back and just give them another quarter turn on the springs. That just gives me a little more assurance that they're not going to slip. And now we're ready to remove the rod, and everything is set, and we're ready to test the garage door. So at this point, you want to be able to open the garage door really easily, and the garage door needs to stay in place when you let go of it. It doesn't need to be tight enough that it picks the door up on its own, but you also don't want it loose enough that the door just falls straight down. It's kind of neutral. It's pretty easy to open and close, and then you know your spring is tight. If for some reason your garage door is a little heavy or a little light, you can always adjust that spring a little bit more. A quarter turn goes a long way. Keep that in mind. And at this point, when everything seems to be working right and it's adjusted okay, I like to shut my door one last time and check all of my bolts and fasteners to make sure they're nice and tight. And then you're ready to put this garage door back in service. If you like these types of videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. Take a look at some of my other videos. At the very least, you might be entertained.